Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and for those of you who are new to the show, we are an African-centered talk show who corrects errors where errors are found, and I try to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. And I also believe that only through dialogue can there be a shift in consciousness. I know, and I established this format so because I know that the media sometimes get things wrong, and also the media sometimes get things wrong deliberately. And I wanted a space in which I can articulate our cultural truths based on many distractions and distortions and misconcepts that even as we speak is being perpetrated and also maintained by the corporate run media. You know, no matter how liberal they seem to be, they do have a survival mechanism. So a lot of the things that are necessary to bring truth to the topics that are in the news today, we tend to depend on a media system that whole existence based on maintaining the status quo. So they're only going to go too far when it comes to truth, and especially the truth of who we are as people of African descent. In the news, you might have been hearing a lot about this concept of CTR or critical race, CRT, critical race theory, and things like that. The media is pushing this idea that it's because of this critical race theory that the Democratic person who was running in Virginia lost the race to a Trump-like Republican, and again, white America betrayed us as people of African descent. Because if you're going by a person who follows a Trump type of agenda, then it's not going to benefit people of color, black people. And why that agenda is still being propped up a year after that man has left office tells you that there's still something here in America that needs to be fixed when it comes to living up to those words of Jefferson that all men are created equal. And why is it that still white America still listens to the nonsense that goes against even those poor or middle class whites' own agenda? They rather just vote for somebody that is not will not help them, but influence and support those who are in the top 1%. But what I'm bringing about today is a discussion that I've been doing for the last number of months, and I titled these series of talks using, for example, critical race theory as one of the topics I talked about in previous shows, and those topics about race in America that affects us. What about Black Lives Matter? Why are we still dealing with issues about race? Well, if you don't understand, in order to understand the present moment, you must understand the history, the what was done before in order to understand what is going on now. Critical race theory, I guess I'll just redress that to start this discussion, was a theory that came out by a couple of professors back in the mid-'70s. So it's been around for a long, long, long time, regardless, again, what the media is telling you, like it's just something that came out in the last year or so. No. It's something that is being utilized as propaganda by those neoconservatives who want to maintain power. And they'll lie, and they would use any kind of method that will manipulate those people and trigger certain responses, especially in white America, through fear. Now, critical race theory, most people don't even know what it is or never heard about it other than the last 6 months maybe, was a series of discussions that were taught are being taught for the last 40 years or more at college level. Especially at the master's program. If you're going to get your master's degree in law, you might have taken a class on critical race theory. And all it is, it was a theory that says in order to understand people of African descent today, you got to understand the laws that were produced going back to colonial times, okay, slave codes, and those types of laws that produce certain type of behavioral patterns between white America and black America, and how those laws affected people of African descent. Okay? How did it affect how we function as a normal human being? Okay, when you had a law that said that you were enslaved, there's a certain way you are going to be treated by the dominant group. And how did how did those laws affect our behavioral pattern as a free human being before we were kidnapped off the west coast of Africa, 3,000 square miles of people, millions of people, put on cramped enslaved ships under duress and dropped off along the way from the Caribbean all the way up to Maine, because enslavement covered all across America, even northern states in the 1600s and 1700s and 1800s had enslavement before the Civil War. All right, so these things had an effect on how we function as human beings. And then you add the black codes of the 1870s, okay, the segregation type code that tell us where we can live, where we can live, who we can go to school with. Those type of laws had an effect on the dynamic of our day-to-day life. And many of the traumas that come out of dealing with those laws had an effect on us as people of African descent. And critical race theory said to those lawyers to be that when you deal with law with black people or deal with the laws that you're going to have to negotiate in court, take that into consideration. The history of certain laws and how it produces certain patterns of behaviors between white men and women and black men and women. You see it today if you look at many of the video clips that you're dealing with when you got these so-called Karens asking black men, whether they are a UPS driver or dropping off a package, doing their work, or just sitting in their car reading a book at their lunchtime, some white person going to come up to them and ask them what they're doing. They don't do it to other white people, but they're going to do it to people of color. The way cops approach us when they do traffic stops. Those types of behaviors were not something that came out of natural law. We were not born that way. There were certain laws that were embedded in the American system that produced those type of behaviors. And until we talk about it and have an honest conversation as human beings, we will never deal with this thing called racism, which is embedded in the DNA of America. But many people don't want to deal with that truth, but they'll have to deal with the ramifications of those truths. And that's what I want to talk about today. This, again, correct errors where errors are found, and introduce facts based on when we find that many people, like those who are pushing this false narrative of the critical race, which is based on pure fiction. I don't just come up with these topics out of the blue. I do my research. I've been doing this show for nearly 25 years now, and I do my homework. It's benefited me through the years. In the tradition of people like J.A. Rogers and great scholars like that, who were not trained as historians, but spent most of their lives in libraries and reading and wrote books. And I I model myself on that through the show. Every topic I talk about is based on my personal research. As I know today, you've heard some of these anti-vaxxers said they're not going to take the vaccine until they do their research. I don't know what research they're doing, because many of the things that many of the terms that I'm hearing them talk about by why they're not taking the vax show me that they are not doing any kind of research at all. But today's topic are based on two books. I put the first one up, and I always say, why do you have to reinvent the wheel? Now, the first book is based on a scholar that I've been following since the 90s. And this is one of the books that I have in my library at home, and which some of my information is coming from when I deal with the psychological functionality of why we're functioning the way we're functioning. That we cannot deal with the present moment until we understand the issues that came from the past. And the image of the author of this book is Brother Dr. Naeem Akbar. He is a licensed and trained psychiatrist. In fact, he was a professor at, he might be still a professor at Florida State University. He ran the Black Studies program there. And you could look up his lectures on YouTube if you never heard him, and you'll be amazed at a lot of the things that he talks about, which makes sense. And you'll never find him on CNN or MSNBC or any of these media outlets, because he does make sense, and he has been doing these researches for almost 40 years, since the 1980s. Another one, I have the book right here also that I put up, that I'm another source of my talk today in these shows, is based on this book here, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, by Dr. Joy DeGruy. Dr. Naeem Akbar is a psychiatrist. She's a social scientist. And she did a 6-year research before she published this book back in 2006, I think, 2006. So both of this information that I'm getting, those are my sources. The epistemology, when you deal with information from people, one of the things that I learned that you need to ask, what is the source of your knowledge? Okay, if you hear everybody got an opinion, but opinions are not facts. All right, and these books that I'm also I'm talking about and using as my source of knowledge, I also have other books that validates everything they're saying. You know, I could go to my library today. So everything I'm doing, I'm not just Googling, the information. I am actually doing research. So I want to give you the source of my knowledge and the people who I respect. Again, the title of the show is The African Americans and the Enduring Impact of Slavery Upon Them. At the heart of the American myth, that's what I call the stuff that we learn as children in school, we are conditioned to believe in this thing called the American exceptionalism, that somehow we are exceptional in the world based on the aspect of this is the land of the free and the home of the brave. This myth claims that this American exceptionalism was born through past people's quest for freedom. Okay, that's the basic theme, and everything we learned from the first thing we were taught about, what is the origin of Thanksgiving or the pilgrims coming here. Everything to seek freedom. And once you touch this land, once you touch this place called America, or even in pre-America and colonial time, everybody comes here, and there is this thing called freedom that they're introduced to. That's the story we've been told over and over and over again. And even that type of concept is why people are so easily influenced by the lies about critical race theory. Why? Because critical race theory is the true American history, the true American history that includes us, this black skin. And when we talk our cultural truth, like I do on the show, we have a totally different historical reality that contradicts the myth of American exceptionalism, okay? You know, this myth that tells the world that we are a beacon of freedom, and it's been telling us this mythology for 200 years, you know, how this country stands above all as a beacon of this thing called freedom. For all people seeking liberty, all oppressed people in the world could leave that oppression and come here to find this thing called liberty. But you had to do something in order to maintain that mythology. You had to leave out a whole history of black people, Native Americans, you know, who were here before the first Englishmen or Frenchmen or Spaniard came to this continent. You know, Latinos. We're in Texas. This used to be Mexico. And this dichotomy, this contradiction that we have to deal with in order to speak our cultural truth is one of the reasons that critical race theory is being pushed out, and the fear of us traumatizing young white children. That's some of the stuff I've heard on the news today in white America. That was the excuse that the majority white people who voted Republican in Virginia are using as an excuse to push a certain agenda. That's what Trump and his white nationalist a party, not the Republican Party anymore, they're mostly white nationalist party, are pushing to maintain that mythology, to maintain power, because they're afraid that brown, black, and yellow and other people who are just as Americans as anybody else are gaining power to vote. That's why you have voting restrictions being put in black and brown that affects us disproportionately. That's why you have redistricting. All these things are an attempt to maintain a 200-year-old myth that justify actions today. And if you don't understand that, the lie of the past, you'll never understand why things are being done the way they're being done to us. And the trauma that comes when people of African descent who wants to speak about this truth, that's why we talk about Black Lives Matter. That's why those brothers and sisters who established the critical race theories back in the 70s want people to understand the effects of those laws in colonial days, or during enslavement, or during Reconstruction periods, those apartheid laws or Jim Crow laws had an effect on us to this very day. That's why when a brother or sister is driving, in many of these videos you might see on YouTube or one of these other internet website, you see us react to cops who come out their car with their hands on their guns approaching us. There is a way that you notice brothers and sisters reacting. We tense up. We're outraged by, because we know from our own unique experience that we have been treated differently. And those responses and those reactions are cultural trauma. That's what I want people to understand. When you see a person sweating or overreacting or seem to getting louder, those are effect of the social trauma What happened to black people after 3 centuries of enslavement, 246 years of enslavement, and another 100 years of apartheid? You don't think they had a psychological effect on people of African descent? See, but that goes against the mythology of a place where it's supposed to be free and justice is everywhere. And this is the land of milk and honey. This is the myth that we've been living by, American exceptionalism. No. It might have been exceptional to those people who are of European descent, even those who might have came in through Ellis Island at the lower economic level, but you see there was always a 2-tier system in America. One black, one white, and both unequal. And it's still that way to this day. And the reason was because of the laws that were passed that made it so. It was not some kind of natural way, or we were just natural lazy. How could you be enslaved and work from can't see to can't see? And then we got this myth about black men and women being lazy. When we built this country with our backs and our sweat and our tears, and we still have to deal with that. And we need to talk about this. When you go to a psychiatrist, when you go to a psychologist, when you go to any student of the mind, okay, none of them would deny that there's a thing called trauma. Okay, nobody would have to deal with that. How do you deal with the contradiction of a place that is a beacon for people who are oppressed and seeking freedom and liberty, with a country, when we tell our story, that we were oppressed in that same country? When we seek liberty, we were violating laws when we left the plantation. So you want to understand how the criminal justice system looked at people that look like me. Why is it that there is this kind of cultural perception of black people being criminals, or there's a negative milieu in the environment when it comes to how we were treated in America compared to the mythology of protecting and serving? Because for hundreds of years, not just a decade or two, for hundreds of years, any kind of law enforcement system whose job was established not to protect and serve black people, but to contain and control black people. Totally different mindset when carried out behaviorally. When we were dealt with by law enforcement, whether it was slave catchers at the time, when a black man or a black woman had this idea of freedom in the 1700s, in the 1800s, excuse me, our concept was to break away from the shackles. We got this images of plantations, but they were work camps. No different when it comes to black people who were living there generationally than what we have this concept in Russia with the gulags and the way those prisoners were treated. No different on plantation, even though we get this mythology of the colonels and people drinking mint juleps on the front porch of these plantations. But in Slave Row, it was a whole different reality. Okay? There was no concept of the being in the land of the free. We need to speak this cultural truth. and that's one of the reasons that books like Beloved was used. I mean, I heard it in the news and I could not believe that. For those of you who don't know what Beloved is, it was a book that was written by a Pulitzer Prize winning, you might have heard of her, Toni Morrison, who passed not a couple of years ago. She wrote this book and it came out in 1987. In 1988, it won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, keyword fiction. But it was based on a story that she discovered in her research for the book about a sister in 1856 called Margaret Garner. Margaret Garner and her husband, Robert Garner, and her in-laws, Robert Garner's mother and father, and their 4 children were escaping, did a brilliant plot under conditions. In fact, it was in January, February of 1857, where they escaped 2 farms. Robert and Margaret were married, but she was owned by a neighboring farm, and he was owned by another farm. But they found their way, and they was in Kentucky, which was a slave state, and they made it across the Cincinnati River into Ohio, where they were thought to be free. But because of a law called the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, all right, that was compromised between white men in Congress who didn't give a dang about the black lives and the trauma that enslavement caused. The owner of Margaret found them in a cabin on the other side in free territory, and that is where she was captured. And she was so frustrated and afraid of going back into that system, and her daughters going back into that system, because 3 of the kids, she was forced by her owner, raped her. She was married, but 3 of the kids, and Robert accepted those kids because they were with them when they made it to the cabin, that she actually killed one of the child, and she was going to kill the others, but she was stopped. And that is what the story of Beloved, which was a fictional character dealing with that trauma. That is what enslavement was all about. I'm going to stop here and continue in the next segment and talk more about distress. Peace. Hotep. Bye-bye.